I was 34 years of age when I met my mother, and that was when poetry came close. I had to relearn my life, the life that was taken away from me when I was born. And only poetry could do that, because poetry understands feelings and emotions. Poetry is not always about the writing of poetry. I think some poets forget that, and they get caught up in their self-importance. But that's not good for poetry. A good poet will read many poets from around the world, and coming to Medellín has allowed me to meet many new indigenous and wise and strong poets. And when I'm at home and I'm back by myself, I can still read their words. I can still keep Medellín alive in my heart in Australia. My mother was born under a tree in the desert.
Mi madre nació bajo un árbol en el desierto.
When she was 4 years old,
Cuando ella tenía 4 años,
atomic bombs were dropped on our country.
Cuando ella tenía 4 años, tiraron bombas atómicas sobre nuestro país.
The family had to leave the desert.
Y la familia tuvo que abandonar el desierto.
And my mother was taken away from her mother.
Y mi madre fue arrebatada de los brazos de su madre.
She worked really hard for Aboriginal people.
Ella trabajó muy duro por todos los pueblos aborígenes.
When she died, she was like in the top job in Canberra with the government.
Cuando ella murió, estaba en el trabajo más importante con pueblos aborígenes dentro del gobierno australiano.
This is my last love poem to my mother.
Este poema es el último poema de amor que escribí para mi madre.
We took her from the city and put her back into the land.
Nosotros la sacamos de la ciudad y la volvimos a llevar al territorio.
My mother screams as I touch her hair, attempting to brush away the coarseness with my hands, to entwine twigs filled with leaves into her locks, a tiara of green to soften her face. And our tears dry now, my mother is frailing. She talks only to those who have gone before, no longer seeing my love, no longer needing. And the wailing bursts from her mouths as she sinks to the ground, her mother the earth, and my mother the dying. Throws sand in her face, tasting the grit in her mouth, and wailing louder, throws herself forward, pushing her breasts into the softness of the earth, her mother, and my mother the dying. Crawls down into that final embrace. Her conversation incoherent now, as if like a child she is practicing words for the lifetime to come. And the syllables loud and guttural spill over the sand, her mother, the earth, and I walk away leaving her there in that cradle, safely nestled in the roots of that tree, safe in our country, our solace, her grave. The biggest influence in my poetry were the old people that lived in the desert. We used to write our poetry on our body. We used to write our poetry in the caves. We used to write our poetry in the sand. And quite recently in Australia, we write the poetry in books. So maybe only for 20 years, Aboriginal people in Australia have been making poetry books. So it's very new. The old people in the desert, they taught me to sit in our traditional country and to listen, because the stories stay in the land. And if you learn to listen, you can listen to the stories that your grandmother listened to when she was a little girl. You can listen to the stories that have been lying in that land since creation. It's a very big gift that they gave me. When you hear those stories, the poetry comes to your heart. And you have to learn the skills of poetry to be able to put that on the page. I really enjoy meeting other Indigenous people from around the world and tell them that story, because our stories are similar. Our love for the land inspires our poetry. Our stories live in our land.
Nuestras historias viven en nuestro territorio.
If you sit and listen really quietly, you can hear the land talk.
Si ustedes se sientan y escuchan en silencio, pueden oír cómo el territorio habla.
As people, we belong to the land.
Como pueblo le pertenecemos al territorio.
The land does not belong to us.
El territorio no nos pertenece.
We can't sell it.
No podemos venderlo.
And mining is very bad.
Y la minería es terrible.
Julpu. Life is extinct without birdsong. Dream birds arrive at dawn. Message birds tap at windows. Guardian birds circle the sky. Watcher birds sit nearby. Fill my ears with birdsong. I will survive. Most Indigenous people in the world are suffering. We are still fighting for our land. We are still fighting to stop the mining. We're still fighting to keep our family together. A lot of my poetry is about emotion. Because I was taken away from my family, I had a lot of sadness. So the old people in the desert, they taught me how to start healing that sadness, to live a happy life. And I try to share that in my poetry. I think it's the most important thing I can do. Birds, we call them julpu, are very important to us.
Los pájaros son muy importantes para nosotros y los llamamos yupu.
Julpu.
Tupu.
We believe they are the spirits of our loved ones who have passed away.
Y creemos que son los espíritus de personas amadas que han muerto.
Owls. In stillness I lay, hours before the dawn. An owl wakens me from slumber. Crew, 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 crew. In softness I lay, listening to its call. Crew, 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 crew. In calmness I lay to empty my mind. Is it a message or simply a song? Crew, 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 crew. I think the importance of poetry is that it starts as an individual process. When you are reading the poetry, you can be alone. But there's a big process about those words and those feelings and the wisdom of those words entering your body and your mind. And then you move towards some sort of understanding. I think that's a very powerful thing. Often with music or film, the message is sort of told to you, but in poetry, it's very individual. And we need to honour ourselves as individual.
I can't stop drinking, I tell you true, since I watched my daughter perish. She burned to death inside a car. I lost what I most cherish. I seen the angels hold her as I screamed with useless hope. I can't stop drinking, I tell you true, it's the only way I cope. I can't stop drinking, I tell you true, since I found my sister dead. She hung herself to stop the rapes. I found her in the shed. That rapist bastard still lives here, unpunished in this town. I can't stop drinking, I tell you true, since I cut her down. I can't stop drinking, I tell you true, since my mother passed away. They found her battered down the creek. I miss her more each day. My family blame me for her death. Their words have made me wild. Can't stop drinking, I tell you true, because I was just a child. So if you see someone like me who's drunk and loud and cursing, don't judge too hard, because you don't know what sorrows we are nursing.
In this big world that is growing more crazy, mad, greedy, selfish, disrespectful, we need to keep the process of poetry simple in our hearts. I think poetry is also really important because maybe it is very ancient art form. Maybe poetry was given to us from creation. When people first started walking around the earth, before the modern world, I think a lot of what they would have been speaking was poetry. So poetry has always been, and it always will. And I think history proves that when the world gets in a mess, poetry rises. A lot more people are reading poetry today than 10 years ago because of political climates. I know that's true in my own country. I think a lot more people are writing poetry, not always for the sake of getting published. Because if you were writing poetry, maybe you're not going to kill yourself, because there are so many people who are really, really hurting. There are so many bad things happening in the world. In my country, the Aboriginal suicide rate is the highest in the world because we can't stop the mining on our land. The government won't stop taking the children away. People are poor and hungry. The sadness is always there. But if you have one poetry book and you can read something that makes sense and gives you some focus for the day, then you will live day by day.
See you, I said to the children, as I memorised their honourable faces, filled with laughter and trust in family, innocent in their youth and strong in culture. See you, I said to the elders, as the tears flow in my heart and I bend down to shake their hands and gain my strength by skin. See you, I said at Memoria, and the dust from my car as I drove away was like a ribbon across the desert sand, tying me to that place forever.